preview of Doll's House Part 2. And we're excited to have you join us and excited to see the show tonight. My name is Todd Salovey. I'm Associate Artistic Director of San Diego Repertory Theater. And every first preview of shows that we do at the Rep, I do a program called Talkin Theatre with Todd, where I try to delve into some of the issues that go into the making of the art of the program that you're going to see. Now, this is a piece that is different than a lot of the work that the Rep does, in that it's based on a classic play, Ibsen's A Doll's House, or Doll's House. And it made me think that the Rep doesn't do that many classics. And it made me think as well, what makes a classic a classic? What do we mean when we talk about classics? So I decided to gather 3 of the most extraordinary classical theater artists that I know that are in San Diego and ask them some questions that would ultimately lead me to understand why the Rep doesn't do more classics. So on my far left is Rosina Reynolds, very, very well known to San Diego Rep audiences. Rosina has done at the Rep Uncanny Valley, Doubt, Cymbeline, and Clean House. I refer to her generously as the Grande Dame of San Diego Theater. I've had the great good fortune of directing her in Golda's Balcony. Please welcome Rosina Reynolds. In the middle is Richard Baird. From 2001 to 2009, he directed the Poor Players Theater, which he seems to refer to as a garage band classical theater company. He returned to San Diego in 2014 to found New Fortune Theater Company. He's worked at Old Globe, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, many appearances at North Coast Rep. He was in the Rep's Disgraced. Please welcome Richard Baird. To my left is someone I've been on faculty with at UCSD for several decades. She is a professional voice and accent coach, and she has worked more than 15 seasons at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Her other theaters include the Guthrie Theater, South Coast Rep, Yale Repertory, and La Jolla Playhouse. She is also a professional actress who's worked at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Seattle Rep, Milwaukee Rep, and La Jolla Playhouse. Please welcome Ursula Meyer. Start with just a question, which I guess I ask in all innocence. What makes a classic play a classic? Why do we refer to some plays as classic plays? I guess when you think about the term classic, I guess what comes to mind is either Shakespeare or long or old, but I think there are other definitions of classic. So Rosina, why don't you start with us? What do you think makes a play in the theater a classic?
Longevity, I would say, for one. The fact that it survives and is revisited continually. I mean, obviously Shakespeare being the penultimate, but it's a play that never goes away. The essence of it is still examined continually throughout the years that follow whenever it was published. I think it's also the theme, the subject matter, the overarching ideas that the play has, that are universal themes that never go away, but they're interpreted differently throughout time. But those ideas and stories persist. Who is it that said there's only 5 stories in the world? And we just rewrite them in many variations and continue to do that. But a classic is one that just doesn't go away, that refuses to go away, and is there and studied and examined in schools and colleges and universities as an example of a particular form of theater.
Richard, you're someone who I think most people refer to as a classical actor. So what does that mean for an actor to be that?
I'm still figuring that out myself, but I think that...
I think the first thing that makes a classical actor is they don't use a mic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we're very nervous around microphones. So, I mean, I guess to answer that question, I'll start by saying that I think that the problem that we face with classical theater is that a lot of people think of it as being old white men, and that it's elitist. And I think the major point that I would make about classical theater is that it is not at all elitist. If you think about Shakespeare plays that were being performed for a bunch of groundlings who'd throw rotten eggs at the performers they didn't like, or in Greek theater they could seat up to 40,000 people. So these plays were really meant to embody large ideas, and they require a muscularity from the actors. They require a larger size than naturalism necessarily would lead us to. And I think with Netflix and with 90-minute plays that we, as fun as these can be and as good as they can be, they don't quite encompass the same epic size and nature of classic plays. And that's part of the reason that we continue to want to come back to them.
Is there a play that you consider to be like of the classics play, the classic? I'm curious that because I'm doing the next play in the rep season is Aubergine, and it's been written by Julia Cho. It is a beautiful play. She didn't write a play for about 6 or 7 years after having 5 plays that were done in New York, done across the country. And she made an interesting statement. She said when she wrote her second set of plays, she realized that most plays don't stay around very long. And that you write it, it's really important to you, people are talking about it, and then it's just not done. So what is it that makes for you a play that you are attracted to keep coming back to, and that the theater seems to keep coming back to?
Well, particularly with Shakespeare, but I think this is true of Ibsen, Strindberg, Chekhov. One of the things that's so thrilling to me is that I can keep going back to see these plays, and just based on who's cast will completely give me a different window into how the piece is performed. You know, you can see 300 Hamlets and never really have one that's alike. And for a text that is, you know, for over 400 years old, I find that really vital. What is the classic play? I'm not sure, but I'll let Ursula take over here.
Richard, it's interesting what it's really interesting what you're saying, because you know, the idea of, you know, seeing most plays that we see, you know, in contemporary theater, you would see it once if you loved it. You know, my daughter is debating about whether to see Hamilton a second time, but you're right. I've seen Hamlet 8 times, and I would go, you know, I would go see it again. And there's certain plays that you're just curious as to what will be done with them and who's gonna be in them.
Right.
So Ursula, along with all the questions that are gathering here for you to address, why do you think something stays in the canon? What makes it a classical play? And do you have a play that you would consider the greatest play?
No, I think, well, so I should use this. I think that every culture has a kind of a play that they lift up, or a playwright that they lift up, because they somehow, like for instance with Shakespeare, every single major idea is in there. Jealousy, love, ambition, family, you know, just small stories about a little town that's trying to figure things out. Two women who, like a sitcom, who can't figure out what are they going to do next to trick the guy that's been tricking them. I mean, there's every sort of little story and large story in Shakespeare, on and on and on. So I would say it's more the writer than the play, because whatever you would be interested in, you're going to find it in one of those plays. But then you go to the Spanish canon, and you've got Lope de Vega, and you go to the French canon, you've got Moliere, and you go to the Russians, and you've got Chekhov. So I think every culture has a playwright, maybe, and a set of plays that have lasted and lasted because the stories are deep, are spoken in such a way, or written in such a way that they are able to give lots of different interpretations life. You know, we always say when we're doing a Shakespeare play at UCSD and it's bombing, you know, it's not going to kill Hamlet. Hamlet's not going to die, you know? So, okay, fill the theater with sand, and let's just see what happens, and then maybe we know later that's not a good idea, but Hamlet's going to live on, you know, so.
I feel bad. I know the production she's talking about.
I want to say one more tiny thing, though. The thing that the great playwrights do is they give us these situations that we go, I know what that is, and then there's some kind of surprise, some kind of wonder. When I used to go into the schools, I used to say, we used to say, why is Shakespeare hard? And they would say, well, because it's in a different language. And I would say, oh, what language is that? And they would say, Italian, Latin, and English that nobody speaks anymore. So then I would open up Romeo and Juliet, and I would say, okay, does anybody know Italian, Latin, or English that nobody speaks anymore? And they would all sit on their hands, and then I would read, okay, well, if anybody does, can you translate, where is your mother? And they would be like, oh, you have the translated version. No, I have the real version. So, you know, it's just that's the question, one of your other questions about, you know, how do we help people, you know, come to classic plays, is to realize that they're about us. You know, then I say, have anybody, it's in high school, anybody fallen in love with somebody their parents don't approve of, you know? And you know Romeo and Juliet, you know, and there we go.
But it's also how you're introduced to Shakespeare, for example. How bad your teacher was that first introduced it to you, or made you read it aloud without actually analyzing the text and helping you break it down and understand it. And sometimes going to a theater where it isn't legible, and so you're not being assisted by the production into understanding the text as well, because we've all seen those productions as well. So I think a lot of it is how you're introduced into Shakespeare initially, and I think if it's a poor introduction, then I think your resistance is higher.
Ursula, if I had the opportunity to spend a day being trained as a classical actor, I'd probably want to be trained by you. You know, I've been an acting teacher for many years, but primarily focused on contemporary work. How is training for the classical theater different than training for contemporary theater?
Okay, so I'm biased because I teach in a training program, but I know my husband is one, and I know that there are many phenomenal classical actors who did not go to a university or a conservatory. They trained in smaller ways or different ways, or just did it and did it and did it. But I do think that, first of all, you need to learn how to just be a human being on stage. So when we train, we don't jump right into the classics. We learn about listening and being a real human being. And then when we get to the classics, we want to avoid things like deciding that it's a talking head art. I'm going to get up here and I'm going to recite clearly and beautifully these words, as opposed to something that is physical, something that is emotional. And my wonderful teacher, Cicely Berry, who just passed, 92, stopped coaching at the RSC in 2014. Wow. She was the first vocal coach ever, who said, I had to bring this, her quote, taken from a classic play, Thomas Kyd's A Spanish Tragedy. She's famous for saying, where words prevail not, violence prevails. She was very political. She was very passionate about the words, and one of the things she did is made you physicalize the text. Then another wonderful teacher of mine, Kristen Linklater, you learn how to connect to words one at a time. Honor is not, in our culture, a thing that's easy to connect to. So we take some time with just word by word. How can you find honor in your own soul, in your own life, and how can you have it? How can it be big stakes for you? Then we maybe just do the sounds, because it's music. It's not just words, it's music. And there's a reason why there's 10 T's in a row in an argument scene, or V's and L's in a love scene. You know, in Twelfth Night, Malvolio, Olivia, Viola. It's about love, and they all have L-O-V in their names. You know, it's just genius. And so I keep saying, it's a treasure chest. I'm just showing you where the rubies and the emeralds and the diamonds are, and seeing how much easier it is, actually, to act Shakespeare when you can see those things. Any classic text, when you see what the writer has given you, because words were the only thing. There wasn't visual. It was a hearing, audience is a hearing place. So it wasn't a visual medium. It was a listening medium. Will you go hear this play, somebody says in Shakespeare. And so learning to do aerobics, I call it, for the students to just love the sounds, take all the meaning out, just listen to the sounds, and they still know what it's about. Like when we're kids and we listen to a poem like the Jabberwocky, which is all nonsense words, and it doesn't bother the kids at all that they don't know what the meaning is, because they love, like Dylan Thomas says, the shapes, the words, and the sounds of the words made in my ears.
When you're training someone and you consider them very accomplished, what are they doing that you consider to be really beginning to get some mastery of classical acting?
Verbal relish, enjoying, you know, not saying that person's annoying. You're saying his brain is as dry as the remainder biscuit after a long voyage. You know, that bagel in the back of the car when you drove across country, that's how dry his brain is. So relishing words and ideas and ways of expressing, right? And then also danger. We should be on the edge of our seat. Will Hamlet do this or not? I don't know. It should be like a sporting event. You know, that we're not saying, oh, pretty costumes, oh, don't they sound nice? But we're leaning forward to say, who's going to win? Just like sports. And then, so dangerous, also humor. All those villains have still got to be funny. All those serious people still have to have that side. I mean, irony is kind of a lost art in America. You know, we're very much a black and white culture. And that's why you kind of have to teach kids how to see irony, but that's another thing that I love, when people can see, oh, I don't know if I like him or hate him, and he's Richard III, you know, of course we gotta hate him, but I like him, you know, so that's the wonder, I think, of a good Shakespearean actor.
So who wants to study classical theater at UCSD with Ursula? Richard, what do you, tell me about, you know, what you think are the fundamentals of acting classically, and if you were going to break down your own training and skill, what are the particular components that you think make your work strong?
Well, as Ursula was talking about earlier about different ways of training, I certainly didn't have formal training in the theater. I learned how to do the classics just on the boards and watching other great classical actors doing it. But one of the things that, and I don't think I'm in the majority in this thought, but I think that as a culture in the theater, we have become very scared of the word melodrama. It's become a dirty word in the theater. And, you know, when I've watched, for example, an American performance of Shakespeare, and someone will be, a scene from Cymbeline, we'll say, and Imogen comes and she finds what she thinks to be her dead husband, but it's actually another guy dressed in her husband's clothes, but she thinks this is her dead husband. And you'll see a lot of actors say, oh, well, you'll kind of ask them, give me some more. Feel exactly how horrific this situation would be. Let rip. And they'll say, oh, well, wouldn't that be going a little over the top? And I often want to say, well, it's not exactly a crime, first, and two, the situation is what it calls for. Eggs weren't just broken on the kitchen floor. Your husband has no head. So react to this. Give me the size that this requires, because the language and the size of these characters do, I keep coming back to this phrase, but they require a muscularity. They require something that's a little larger. I have to admit that after a Shakespeare play, when you're playing one of these large roles, and for any of us who have know, it's exhausting. It's exhausting because it really tests you on all sorts of forms, but that's also what makes it such a beautifully cathartic experience as well.
Rosina, I've had the great fortune to work with you many years on the piece we do, Women of Valor, where you've specialized in playing people that have come from Eastern Europe, often have very tragic and trying stories, and also very pronounced accents of many different cultures. You have extraordinary skills in language. How do you approach, be it contemporary language that comes from a person that's complex, or Shakespearean language, such that you're able to bring audiences into the humanity that's behind the language, not to mention the color and music of the language?
I have the faintest idea.
All in one sentence, please.
That sounded like a review, didn't it?
Well, starting first with the women from Women of Valor, for me it's research. It's analyzing text. What I request with Women of Valor is hopefully to hear the person that I am representing. That's obviously very helpful. And then also reading all of the transcript that they originally set up, because I know some of it has to be edited out, but I like to read everything, because you see little nuances within, and you're hearing their vocal patterns, as opposed to something that has been adjusted into a smaller size. So for me, it's rhythm and the musicality of accents. I listen to them and repeat them. I mean, coming from England, and I love to say this in America just because I get a lot of pleasure out of it, is I'm a technical actor, I consider myself. And what I mean by that is that I have to get all the technical aspects clear in my head before I can move into the emotional aspects of the character. So I need to know the voice, I need to know if it's an accent, I need to know the rhythms of that. I need to get that into me before I can understand where their emotional core is and where their emotional content is in the piece. And for me, I do it in that order. So I apply myself technically to a text, but then the emotion is, it's hard to explain that. It's hard. It's like you kind of open a door. I think that's the only way I can describe it. You open a door. You allow this character to come in and infiltrate in a way that you become emotionally connected, and you then understand the choices they're making and the ways they're reacting to a situation. And it's not your way, it's their way. And I think that's the hardest thing to learn as an actor sometimes, is not imposing your will on the character. It's very easy to do, and I mean, we've all heard the classic, but my character wouldn't do that. We've all heard that. Actors have said that, but that's because they're reluctant to go to the place where the character is, and we can impose our will on a character sometimes. And I think it's keeping yourself open and receiving their story. And it may not be something that you're pleased about. And they may be making choices that you don't like. So you have to understand why they are making them and not impose yourself on them.
Thank you. Ursula, the program tonight is based on a play by Ibsen. And I just wonder if you can talk about, why do you think that Ibsen has been a writer whose work has lived on for more than 100 years? And why particularly A Doll's House? Why has that been a piece that's become a classic in the repertoire?
Well, one of the things that Richard said early on is these classic themes. Themes that come up and up and up. And I was thinking about, you know, The Doll's House is about this woman who does something that is unheard of, leaves her family. And you know, and I was thinking back to, remember Kramer versus Kramer?
Yeah.
That was a while ago,
yeah,
but a long time after Doll's House. And it was abhorrent that she would leave this small child with the father and go off to find out who she is, or how to talk, or how to function in a world as one before she could be part of a family. And so I think these themes come around and around and around again, and that's why. And also, he was kind of a rebel. But at the same time, he was part of a sort of a worldwide revolution. I mean, Shaw at the same time was giving us Eliza Doolittle, who at the end of the play walks out, Pygmalion anyway, walks out on Rex Harrison and says, I'm not going to be who you need me to be. I'm going to find my who I am. And so I think that that whole idea of, I just was saying, we were doing a Thanksgiving thing in class the other day about things we are grateful for that we are no longer. And one, second year, first year we're grateful for things that are. But this one young woman said, I am grateful that I no longer have to be in a relationship to be whole. And I think that's Nora. You know, all alone is all one. She needs to find out how to be whole without this kind of thumb over her. And you know, it seems like a long time ago, but it's not.
But isn't there also the element of the play that she tries to fix something and
yes,
does not get supported by her husband?
Yes.
And in fact is berated for that, and he forgives her for the mistake she made. So I think that's what prompted her finally to make that decision, is the fact that she was not seen as an equal.
Right.
And that she was not actually protected by her husband for all that he claimed that he cared. I mean, he was quick to shove the blame onto her.
Still think it's a modern.
Richard, you've been in the play, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell us about who did you play in it, and tell us about your experience.
I played Krogstad at the Old Globe Theatre in 2013, I think it was.
Recently.
And I've worked on a few Ibsens with AC Harvey, and what her method is on day one, it's actually quite daunting on day one, because she comes in and hands you what you think is a thesaurus, and she says, "This is your script," and you. Did we find some lost scenes? And why is this so big? And it's essentially what's known as a platform translation. So what it does is it has all of your lines, but they're written out about 6 or 7 different ways. But it's not a Mad Lib game. It's not like I'm going to just choose which one I like best. It's to give you an idea of what your character is trying to say. And her idea behind it is that all of the characters will then emerge with their own voice, because the actor actually has say in how they're going to say their lines. We did the same process when Rosina and I did Ghosts together in 2010. And it's rather painstaking, and it's very difficult, and there's part of you that wants there to be kind of the workshop of that, and then we'll finish the script and come into to rehearsal with it. But what I also found fascinating about the play, including everything that's been said, but is the societal pressures that are in the play that actually affect all of the characters. And in fact, I think a really great production of Doll's House will make it clear that even poor Torvald, actually, for all of his inability to be able to understand what his wife needs, that he actually thinks, I'm doing absolutely everything I'm supposed to be doing the way society has set it up for me. I am being a good husband, I'm doing all of these things. I'm not supposed to listen to her. That's not part of my job. I'm supposed to care for my family, I'm supposed to do all of these things. And it can become quite tragic. And for my character as well, that I played, Krogstad, because of one thing that he did in his past, blackmail, which actually Nora is guilty of too. But the difference is that now Krogstad, because he got caught, is completely ostracized from the society. And like Loveborg and Hedda Gabler or other roles that Ibsen wrote, these characters, through gossip, through the idea of somebody saying, oh, you're guilty, and then we automatically assume that they are guilty, their lives are ruined in this play. So it's as horrible as what's happening for Nora and for the female characters. I think it's also a condemnation of the society itself.
You know, it's interesting, something that Richard said about the text that we approached with Ghosts. Another large aspect of classical theater is who's the translator.
Absolutely, yes.
And there have been some pretty bad translations.
Yes.
And so what this enabled us to see is what is actually said in the actual language, and we are given a clean, direct translation that has no emotional coloring on it, which is good and bad, but because then you have to find the truth of it and find the right way to say it. But there have been some pretty bad translations too.
Well, and it's not as much a part of our culture. I think that Americans, in general, we can be quite myopic about our history, and we are always moving forward, and we don't always want to really look back. And we also think that English is the only language. Everyone speaks it, so why do I need to learn any other languages? And then what happens is we don't commission new translations of French, Russian, Norwegian, Swedish plays, and that's a great loss, because sometimes when they do happen, you can have wonderful results.
I'm going to ask Richard another question, but then I want to open the floor up to general questions. I know we have people that are interested in the play. We also have people who are family and friends here for Thanksgiving, so it's a great chance to ask your family members a question. They've always wanted to ask. You know, one of my great joys this year is that earlier in the year, my brother, who invented emotional intelligence, explained it to me. And my dad, who's a polymer chemist, he explained to me how DNA was a polymer. So it's really cool to have your family people like teach you something you didn't know. So Richard, you're in the Doll's House. how the audience respond to it. What did you get? I mean, did it feel like they were watching a classical play, or do you feel like the audience was taking some of what Ibsen is doing and really dealing with some of the provocation in it?
No, wonderfully. We used to make a joke backstage that it felt a little bit like we were doing a Victorian melodrama because of the way people were reacting. There were lots of gasping and lots of laughter, which was actually something that I was very happy to find, because when I first came to Ibsen, I was convinced he didn't have a sense of humor until I was on stage and sang it out loud, and then I said, oh, I get it. I should have got this. I'm Norwegian. I suffer in silence. I understand this. And it wasn't until I was on stage that I really realized just how funny and wry he can be. But no, I think the audience was really whisked away by it. Actually, I think it didn't feel dusty at all.
So I'd like to open the floor for some questions. If you're able to use the mic, that would be great. Any questions?
Question, I have a comment. We run a theater in Cherry Creek North in Denver, and
all from Denver behind you.
but we just finished a production of My Name is Asher Lev, and there was a blind person who came to the play, and she happened to be sitting next to me. Well, she understood the play better than anyone else, because when you said about really listening to the words, and that play is so narrative, so when you said that brought that to mind.
Ursula, could you talk to us about, like, how do you get actors to bring out color and meaning in the language? Can you give us a little lesson?
No. I mean, well, one of the exercises that I do is I have them write the monologue with, it's a Shakespeare monologue, with only the consonants, and then only the vowels. And their partner doesn't know what the monologue's about, or what play it's from. And they just say them in the order. And I really don't know how this works, except that I believe it's Shakespeare's brilliance. But then the partner says what they think it's about. And they will say, I see water. I see someone struggling. And it'll be something from The Tempest. Or they'll say, I feel like there's a struggle and there's a fight, and it'll be something from one of the history plays, Henry VI or something. So that's one way to just convince them, that sound is in there. And then, we do lots of pitch range, arbitrary. Let's just see what happens if you just go way up and way down and then stop. Or what if you take each word and physicalize it, and then you can't ever say scuffles again. Take all the movement out, and then say scuffles, but you've got it now, it's in your body. So that's another exercise, that's a Cicely Berry exercise. Cicely also taught me about moving to the punctuation, so you feel the movement of the character's thought. If there's a period, you stop. If there's a comma, you bend. If there's a semicolon, you pause for a second, and you just move forward to the end of the speech. And that and then of course you do it just standing still, but you feel that movement of the thought. Or just looking. Sometimes there's 4 lines before there's a final full stop, we call it, a period. And sometimes it's like in Richard III, he's 4 lines and another new thought, 4 lines and new thought. Then you get to Act 4, 3 words. I am I, Richard is Richard. It suddenly turns into Beckett, So, just looking at how it's structured and then trying it on.
Great. Other questions? So let's turn the. I know that this is a awesome and intimidating panel we have here. Let's flip it. We've talked about how you are acting classical theater, but when you go to see a play, I often find that when I bring my students to see Shakespeare play, Ibsen play, sometimes you feel like you have to open the door for them into sort of how to approach it as an audience member. Let me just go down, and if you can share with us. So if we are going to a classical play for the first time, what are ways that we can open ourselves up to really fully enjoy and get the meat of the experience that you obviously have gotten in your own perception of it?
Well, I think know the story before you go in, first of all. I mean, it's like going to the opera. You can go to the opera blind and enjoy the sounds of the music, but if you actually know the story and if you have broken down the story, if you understand the whole journey of the opera before you go in, I think then you're not in a place of guesswork. So I think that it's knowing the story, if possible reading the play, but certainly knowing what the story is, so what to expect from it, I think is a large part.
An interesting statement that so many stories we go to get the plot, so then we'll know the plot when we come in, right? So how's that different for us?
I guess because it's a classical play and the play is known, so it's not like it's a mystery. I mean, obviously there are people that go to Shakespeare for the first time and don't know anything, and are informed there while they're watching the play. But it really depends on how well that play is said to you, the audience, by the actors. I mean, I've seen enough Shakespeare where I don't know what they're saying, even though I know the play, because it's not being delivered to me. So
I know, and then I've seen Shakespeare where it's like, oh my gosh, I understand every word of that.
Yeah, there are times that it's so magical that it's breathtaking. When you hear every word and understand every word and understand what is being said. But it's really a crapshoot sometimes, depending on what the production is. So I think in that case, I think it's certainly good to be forewarned and forearmed and know the story.
Richard, what would you say about for us as audience members?
Well, I think it's partly the theater's job too to keep producing it, because we have to train audiences just like we do with anything else. So if people are used to, oh hey, every now and then this year I'm going to go see a 3-hour epic that has these giant feelings and thoughts with actors who are speaking at a little more of an elevated level, then we become used to it. But I think we're so concerned with immediacy and naturalism that we forget about the theatricality. We forget about some of these larger themes, I will just say again.
Thank you. Ursula, what are your thoughts?
Well, and then the other thing I would say is that give yourself a break. We are not used to hearing these long thoughts anymore. I will text my son, call me tomorrow, and he doesn't even write back, okay. He writes back, K. You know, it's the thoughts, we are in sound bites right now. So when you go to see a play where there are actually long thoughts, ideas that develop, you have to say, okay, I'm just going to keep my ears open and know that as the play goes on, if it's well done, oftentimes I will get as a voice coach, they were so much easier to understand in the second part than the first part. And I said, no, you were tuned to them, you were starting to, relax, not worry, I'm not going to get every word. That's why it's so great to do it for kids, because half the words they hear all day long, they don't understand, so they're not worried. And they just, will get a sound, get a visual, and enjoy it, and then slowly they start to understand it and say, she's behind the tree, or I did do a production of Romeo and Juliet, though, where the high school students did not know how it ended. Where were you when you didn't know how Romeo and Juliet ended? And the director had me, Romeo taking the potion and me waking up on the beer and moving my head, and they were screaming, turn around, she's alive! And oh, what a treasure to have that wonder back again. But I think it's okay to come at it and say, I may not understand everything, but I'm just going to keep opening and allowing it to wash on me, and then slowly it will get clearer and clearer.
Yeah, I can safely say I saw Ursula in a production of Othello at Shakespeare Santa Cruz years ago, with this guy as well out here. And I'll never forget that when Othello was strangling and attacking Desdemona, the performance I saw, there was a woman who was just beside herself. She was so upset. She said, oh God, please, please, please don't kill her. She's being true to you. Please, please don't do this. And it's wonderful that it still has that effect.
So just to wrap up, and I know the house management wants to let people go into the theater, but I want to ask one more question. Larry Aldridge and Sam Woodhouse are in the building. In a very short pitch, could you tell us why the Rep should do more classical theater?
Why should the Rep do more? Because it's classic.
No, it's actually tied up with a lot of what has just been said. We are living in a world of sound bites. We are. And we're living in unfinished thoughts and incomplete plays. And we're left coming out of the theater going, okay? And these classical pieces address really deep, emotional, human experiences. And they do it in such a leisurely way, because this is an era where people were willing to listen for longer than 50 minutes. They were actually, I mean, this was an era of 3-act plays, for goodness sake. And they were willing to take the time to allow this to wash over them. So I think that we need to broaden our horizons and not reduce everything into these sound bites. And I think doing classical theater opens us up to that.
And don't worry, the show tonight is 87 minutes. Richard.
I completely agree with what Rosie's saying, and it has a lot to do with what we're talking about. You know, in a world where everything is about our phone and about watching as many episodes on Netflix as we possibly can, I think that we could use that same time and really sit through a glorious play that will have us still talking for the next, for centuries.
Ursula?
All right, I have a quote. This is by Tom Stoppard, a living playwright, but one who also appreciated plays from many years ago. Talks about words. My whole thing is the spoken word. And the spoken word that's lasted 400 years or 200 years or 300 years is worth hearing. So here's what he says. Words. They're innocent, neutral, precise, standing for this, describing that, meaning the other. So if you look after them, you can build bridges across incomprehension and chaos. But when they get their corners knocked off, they're no good anymore. I don't think writers are sacred, but words are. They deserve respect. If you get the right ones in the right order, you can nudge the world a little or make a poem which children will speak for you when you're dead. The real thing.
Such an inspiring conversation. This is Talking Theatre with Todd. I want to thank Rosina Reynolds, Richard Baird, and Ursula Meyer. Please enjoy the show tonight. Thank you for joining us.